The Whale and the Grasshopper by Seumas. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Lucy Burgoyne. The Whale and the Grasshopper by Seumas. From the Illustrated Sunday Magazine. When Standish McNeill started talking to his friend Felix O'Dowd as they walked at a leisurely pace towards the town of Castle Gregory on a June morning, what he said was, "The world is a wonderful place when you come to think about it. An island is a wonderful place, and so is America, and though there are lots of places like each other, there's no place like Ballysantanomo. When there's not sunshine there, there's moonshine, and the handsomest women in the world live there, and nowhere else except in Ireland or the churchyards could you find such decent people." "Decency," said Felix, "when you're poor is extravagance, and bad example when you're rich." "And why?" said Standish. "Well," said Felix, "because the poor imitate the rich, and the rich give to the poor, and when the poor give to each other, they have nothing of their own." "That's communism you're talking," said Standish, "and that always comes from education and enlightenment. Sure, if the poor weren't dacent, they'd be rich, and if the rich weren't dacent, they'd be poor, and if everyone had a conscience, they'd be less millionaires. 'Tis a poor bird that can't pick for himself." "But suppose a bird had a broken wing and couldn't fly to where the pickings were," said Felix. "Well, then bring the pickings to him. That would be charity." "But charity is decency, and wisdom is holding your tongue when you don't know what you're talking about." "If the people of Ballysantanomo are so decent, how is it that there are so many bachelors there? Do you think it right to have all the young women worrying their heads of reading trashy novels and doing all sorts of silly things, like fixing their hair in a way that were never intended by nature, and doing so for years and years and having nothing in the end but the trouble of it all?" "Well, 'tis hard blamin' the young men, because every young lady you meet looks better to you than the last until you meet the next, and so you go on to another, until you're so old that no one would marry you at all unless you had lots of money, a bad liver, and a shaky heart. An old man without any sense, lots of money, a bad liver, and a shaken heart can always get a young lady to marry him," said Felix, "though rheumatics, gout, and a wooden leg are just as good in such a case." "Every bit," said Standish, "but there's nothing like a weak constitution, a cold climate, and a tendency to pneumonia." "Old men are queer," said Felix. "They are," said Standish, "and if they were all only half as wise as they think they are, then they'd be only young fools in the world. I don't wonder a bit at the suffragettes. And a time will come when we won't know men from women, unless someone tells us so." "Wish 'tis my belief that there will be a great reaction some day, because women will never be able to stand the strain of doing what they please without encountering opposition. When a man falls in love, he falls into trouble likewise, and when a woman isn't in trouble, you may be sure that there's something wrong with her." "Well," said Standish, "I think we will leave the women where the devil left St. Peter." "Where was that?" asked Felix. "Alone," answered Standish. "That would be all very fine if they stayed there," said Felix. "Now," said Standish, "as I was talking of me travels in foreign parts, I want to tell you about the morning I walked along the beach at Ballysantanomo, and a warm morning it was, too." So I says to meself, 'Standish McNeil,' says I, 'what kind of fool of a man are you? Why don't you take a swim for yourself?' So I did take a swim, and I swam to the rocks where the seals go to get their photographs taken, and while I was having a rest for meself I noticed a grasshopper sitting a short distance away, and upon me word, but he was the most sorrowful looking grasshopper I ever saw before or since. Then all of a sudden a monster whale comes up from the sea, and lies down beside him and says, 'Well,' says he, 'is that you? Who'd ever think of finding you here? Why, there's nothing strange under the sun but the ways of women.' ''Tis me that's here, then,' said the grasshopper. 'Me grandmother died last night, and she wasn't insured either.' 'The practice of negligence is the curse of mankind and the root of sorrow,' says the whale. 'I suppose the poor old soul had her fill of days, and sure we all must die, and 'tis cheaper to be dead than alive at any time. A man never knows that he's dead when he's dead, and he never knows he's alive until he's married.' 'You're a great one to expatiate on things you know nothing about, like the barbers and the cobblers,' said the grasshopper. 'I only want to know if you're coming to the funeral tomorrow.' 'I'm sorry I can't,' says the whale. 'My grandfather is getting married for the 10th time, and as I was in China on the last few occasions, I must pay me respects by being present at tomorrow's festivities,' says he. 'I'm sorry you can't come,' says the grasshopper, 'because you are heartily welcome, and you'd add prestige to the ceremony besides.' 'I know that,' says the whale, 'but America doesn't care much about ceremony.' 'Who told you that?' says the grasshopper. 'Haven't I me eyesight, and don't I read the newspapers?' says the whale. 'You mustn't read the society columns then,' says the grasshopper. 'Wisha, for the love of St. Crispin,' says the whale. 'Have they society columns in the American newspapers?' 'Indeed they have,' says the grasshopper, 'and they oftentimes devote a few columns to other matters when the dressmakers don't be busy.' 'America is a strange country surely, a wonderful country, not to say a word about the length and breadth of it. I swam round it twice last week without stopping, to try and reduce me weight, and would you believe me that I was tired after the journey, but the change of air only added to me proportions.' 'That's too bad,' said the grasshopper. 'Are you an American?' said the whale. 'Of course I am,' says the grasshopper. 'You don't think 'tis the way I'd be born at sea, and no nationality at all like yourself. I'm proud of me country.' 'And why, might I ask?' 'Well, don't we produce distinguished Irishmen? Don't we make Americans of the Europeans, and Europeans of the Americans? Think of all the connoisseurs who wouldn't buy a work of art in their own country, when they could go to Europe and pay 10 times its value for the pot boilers that does be turned out in the studios of Paris and London.' 'There's nothing like home industry,' says the whale, 'in a foreign country, I mean. After all, who knows anything about a work of art but the artist? And very little he knows about it either. A work of art is like a flower, it grows, it happens, that's all, and, unless you charge the devil's own price for it, people will think you are cheating them. Wisha, I suppose the best anyone can do is to take all you can get, and if you want to be a philanthropist, give away what you don't want,' says the grasshopper. 'All worth missing I catches,' says the whale, 'and all worth catchin' I misses, like the fisherwoman who missed the fish and caught a crab. How's things in Europe? I didn't see the papers this morning.' 'Europe is in a bad way,' says the grasshopper. 'She was preaching civilizations for centuries, so that she might be prepared when war came to annihilate herself. "It looks that way to me," says the Whale. "Is there anything else worth while going on in the world?" "There's the Irish question," says the Grasshopper. "Where's that island is?" says the Whale. "Isn't that an island to the west of England?" "No," says the Grasshopper, "but England is an island to the east of Ireland." Wisha sees the Whale. "It gives me indigestion to hear people talking about Ireland. Sure, I nearly swallowed it up be mistake while I was on holiday in the Atlantic last year, and I'm sorry now that I didn't." "And I'm sorry that you didn't try," says the Grasshopper. "Then you'd know something about indigestion. The less you have to say about Ireland, the less you'll have to worry for. Remember that me father came from Cork." "Can't I say what I like?" says the Whale. "You can think what you like," says the Grasshopper, "but say what other people like if you want to be a good politician." "There's nothing so much abused as politics," says the Whale. "Except politicians," says the Grasshopper. "Only for the Irish there'd be no one bothering about poetry and the drama today. Only for fools there'd be no wise people, and only for sprats, hag, and mackerel there, you'd be no whales and a good job that would be too." "What's that you're saying?" says the Whale very sharply. "Don't have me to lose my temper with you," says the Grasshopper. "Wish a bad luck to your impudence and bad manners, you insignificant little spalpeen." "How dare you insult your superiors?" says the Whale. "Who's me superior?" says the Grasshopper. "You, is it?" "Yes, me then," says the Whale. "Another word from you," says the Whale, "and I'll put you where Napoleon put the oysters." "Well," says the Grasshopper, "there's no doubt but vanity, ignorance and ambition are three wonderful things, and you have them all. Neither you nor Napoleon, nor the Kaiser himself and his 100 million men could do hurt harm to me. You could have every soldier in the German army, the French army, and the Salvation Army looking for me, and I'd put the comether on them all." "I can't stand this any longer," says the Whale, and then and there he hits the rock a whack of his tail, and when I went to look for the Grasshopper, there he was sitting on the Whale's nose, as happy and contented as if nothing happened. And when he jumped back to the rock again, he says, "A little exercise, with 'tis tempered and discretion, never does any harm, but violent exertion is a very foolish thing if you value your health. But it is only people who have no sense, but think they have it all, who make such errors. If I could get a hold of you," says the Whale, "I'd knock some of the pride out of you." "That would be an ungentlemanly way of displaying your displeasure," says the Grasshopper. "I'd scorn," says he, "to use violent means with you, or do you physical injury of any kind. All you want is self-control and a little education. You should know that quantity without quality isn't as good as quality without quantity." "Sure 'tis I'm the fool to be wasting me time listening to the likes of you," says the Whale. "If any of me family saw me now, I'd never hear the end of it." "Indeed," says the Grasshopper, "no one belonging to me would ever recognize me ever again if they thought I was trying to make a whale behave himself. There would be some excuse for one of my attainments feeling proud, but as for you—" "And what in the name of nonsense can you do except give old guff out of you?" "I haven't time to tell you all," says the Grasshopper, "but to commence with, I can travel all over the world and have the use of trains, steamers, sailing ships and automobiles, and will never be asked to pay a cent. And I can live on dry land all me life if I choose, while you can't live under water, or over water, on land or on sea, And while all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't catch me if they were trying till the crack of doom, you would be caught by a few poor, harmless sailors, who couldn't know a crow from a cormorant, and who'd sell your carcass to make oil for foolish wives to burn, and write letters to other people's husbands, and fill the world with trouble. And what about all the whalebone we supplies for ladies' corsets and paper knives? And what about all the stories we make for the novelists and the moving pictures? And we're at the sprig of holly now," said Felix. "Is it a pint porter or a bottle you'll have?" "I'll have a pint, I think," said Standish. End of story.